Welcome to Roll Credits, where movie lovers get the trivia they didn't know they needed. This podcast was created with the help of AI tools. While we do our best to keep things accurate and fun, there may occasionally be errors or outdated information. Always double-check if you're citing trivia and enjoy the show. Today, we're racing through deserted London in 28 Days Later, Danny Boyle's era-defining horror that reignited the zombie genre with a burst of rage. From budget hacks to digital video breakthroughs, we've got plenty of infection-level trivia to share. So, 28 Days Later. When it came out in 2002, it really felt different, didn't it? Not just another horror flick.
Oh, absolutely. It hit like a shot of adrenaline. It just dropped you right into this incredibly bleak, desolate world.
And that opening. Waking up in the hospital.
Yeah, you're right there with Jim, Cillian Murphy's character. He's a bicycle courier, wakes up from a coma, maybe a month long, and the hospital is just empty.
Eerily empty.
Totally. IV bags empty, monitors off. He walks out, and London itself is deserted. It's incredibly haunting, that silence.
It really is.
Yeah.
That quiet before the storm, almost literally. Because it doesn't stay quiet for long, does it?
Not at all. He pretty quickly runs into the infected, and these aren't, your classic slow-moving zombies.
These guys are fast and angry.
Exactly. They're driven by this rage virus, super contagious, super aggressive, pure nightmare fuel. He almost gets taken down immediately.
But he gets rescued, right, by Selena and Mark.
Right. Naomi Harris, Noah Huntley. They're survivors, they know the ropes, and they kind of bring him up to speed on how society just completely collapsed. Survival becomes the only thing that matters.
They don't stay a small group for long?
No, they later team up with Frank, played by Brendan Gleeson, and his daughter Hannah. Megan Burns played her.
Ah, right. So they form this little makeshift family unit.
Sort of. And their goal becomes this radio broadcast they hear. It talks about a military sanctuary up north.
The classic glimmer of hope in the darkness.
Pretty much. But the journey, well, it's not just about dodging the infected. That's maybe the most chilling part.
You mean other people?
Exactly. They run into other survivors, specifically this group of soldiers led by Christopher Eccleston's character, Major Henry. And let's just say their idea of rebuilding society is deeply disturbing.
Yeah, the film really goes there, questioning who the real monsters are when everything falls apart.
Yeah.
Human nature under pressure.
It explores survival, hope, and how thin the veneer of civilization really is.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. One of the things everyone remembers is the look of the film. Those empty London streets, Piccadilly Circus, Westminster Bridge, completely deserted. How on earth do they pull that off?
Well, that's one of the most fascinating bits of trivia, actually. It comes down to budget, believe it or not.
Really? It looks so epic.
Yeah, but they only had about $8 million, which for filming in central London is not a lot. They couldn't afford to properly shut down streets like a big Hollywood production.
So what did they do? Sneak in?
Kind of. They used guerrilla tactics. They filmed incredibly early in the morning, like 4 a.m., when the streets were naturally quietest.
4 a.m. Okay, that takes dedication.
It really does. And get this, for traffic control, they didn't have massive police cordons. They had crew members, including Danny Boyle's own daughter, who was 19 at the time.
No way.
Yeah, just politely asking the few commuters who were around to maybe wait a minute while they grab the shot.
Just asking politely. In London. That's amazing.
Boyle said it was only possible because security was so much more relaxed before 9/11. Apparently, after that, doing something similar would have been basically impossible.
Wow. Timing was everything then.
Absolutely. And that constraint, that need to shoot fast and lean, actually fed into the film's whole aesthetic.
You mean the gritty, almost documentary feel?
Exactly. That wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate choice tied to the cameras they used.
Ah, right. They didn't use standard film cameras, did they?
Nope. It was shot almost entirely on consumer-grade Canon XL1 mini DV cameras, digital video.
Mini DV? Like the camcorders people used back then?
Pretty much. And again, it wasn't just about saving money, though I'm sure that helped. Boyle and the cinematographer, Anthony Dodd Mantle, wanted that specific look.
What kind of look were they going for?
They wanted it to feel like news footage, something raw, like maybe you'd found the tape on the ground, not clean, not high-res. That lo-fi quality makes the horror feel more immediate, more real.
It absolutely does. It feels less like watching a movie and more like You're right there, seeing it unfold.
And to make the most of those tiny dawn shooting windows,
Yeah.
they used multiple cameras at once, sometimes up to 8 XL1s running simultaneously.
Cameras.
Yeah, grabbing different angles, making sure they got what they needed super quickly. Even the producer, Andrew McDonald, and the gaffer were operating cameras sometimes. It was all hands on deck.
That's incredible. That limitation really forced creativity.
Totally. The budget, the schedule, the camera choice, it all fused together to create that unforgettable, raw energy.
Speaking of energy, let's talk about the cast. You mentioned Cillian Murphy and Naomi Harris. This film was huge for them, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. A major breakout for both. They've obviously gone on to huge things, but back then they weren't massive stars.
And that helped the film.
Boyle thought so. He said using actors who weren't, A-list superstars made you feel like anyone could die at any moment, raise the stakes. Everybody's dispensable, I think was his phrase.
Chilling. And Naomi Harris as Selena, she was so tough.
Yeah, she really embodied that hardened survivor mentality, just instantly believable.
And Christopher Eccleston as Major Henry.
Oh.
We touched on him, but his performance is quite something.
It really is. He brings this kind of terrifying logic to the soldiers' actions. It's not just random cruelty, it's a warped sense of order, which makes it even more disturbing when you realize what their plans are for Selena and Hannah.
Yeah, that whole sequence is incredibly tense. Now, behind the camera, you mentioned Anthony Dodd Mantle, the cinematographer. His work was pretty groundbreaking with the digital video.
Hugely influential. He really embraced the DV format, pushed its limits.
Yeah.
That multi-camera run-and-gun style for the London scenes was largely down to him figuring out how to make it work. He proved digital could have its own powerful aesthetic for narrative film, not just documentaries.
And the infected themselves, the makeup must have been key. They looked genuinely horrific.
Yeah, the makeup effects were crucial. They needed to look human, but utterly ravaged by the rage virus. So lots of emphasis on bloodshot eyes, veins, messed up skin, that gaunt-driven look. Practical effects, mostly.
It worked. They were terrifying because they still looked human, just wrong.
Exactly, like reanimated corpses, but still capable of that terrifying speed and aggression.
And the idea for that speed came from Alex Garland, the writer, inspired by a video game.
That's the story. Apparently, he was playing Resident Evil and found the classic slow zombies weren't that threatening tactically. So he thought, what if they were fast, like as fast as the zombie dogs in the game? And boom, the fast zombie or infected concept was supercharged. It completely changed the dynamic of the threat.
It really did. No more casual strolling away from danger.
No, it became about sheer panic and desperate sprinting. It injected pure terror.
You know, movies often have bits left on the cutting room floor. Were there different ways 28 Days Later could have ended?
Oh, yeah. There were a few alternate endings floating around. The one we saw in cinemas, the relatively hopeful one where they get rescued by the jet. That wasn't the only option.
What else was considered?
Well, Alex Garland wrote a much darker, unshot ending set back in the hospital. In that version, Jim actually receives a blood transfusion, but it turns out to be infected blood, and he turns.
Whoa. That would have been bleak.
Totally bleak. No escape from the rage. Then there was the ending they actually used for the U.S. release, which many consider the original ending.
What was that one?
It's the one in the Lake District where they lay out sheets on the grass to spell hello as a jet flies over. It's, more explicitly hopeful.
Right. I think I remember seeing that one on a DVD extra or something.
Yeah, there's even a slight variation where they start spelling hell and then quickly add the O as the plane appears and the pilot seems to wave back. So they definitely played with that balance between despair and hope.
Fascinating. So, looking at the big picture, what's the lasting legacy of 28 Days Later? It clearly made waves.
Huge waves. It's pretty much universally credited with revitalizing the entire zombie genre.
By making them fast.
Mostly, yeah. That shift from the slow, shambling Romero-style zombie to the fast, aggressive, infected or rage zombies brought a whole new energy and, frankly, terror to the genre. It made zombies scary again in a different way.
It definitely felt like a shot in the arm for horror.
And you can see its influence everywhere. You mentioned The Walking Dead earlier, the focus on human conflict being as dangerous as the monsters, the grim survival aspects. A lot of that owes a debt to 28 Days Later.
Yeah, that theme of humans are the real monsters really resonated.
It also echoes older stuff like John Wyndham's The Day of the Triffids, the idea of society collapsing seemingly overnight due to a biological threat.
And the story isn't over, potentially.
Potentially not. There was the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, back in 2007.
Which Boyle and Garland weren't as directly involved in directing or writing.
Right, though they produced. But now there's serious talk, like really serious talk, between Boyle and Garland about doing 28 Years Later.
Wow, years later, picking up the story decades on.
Exactly. Exploring what that world looks like after almost 30 years. What threats remain? How have people adapted or devolved? It could be amazing if they pull it off.
That would be something to see. How did critics react back in 2002, especially with its unusual look?
It was a bit mixed initially, particularly in the UK. Some critics kind of dismissed it as just genre stuff.
Ah, the old genre bias.
Yeah. But in the US, the reviews were largely fantastic. Stephen King was a massive fan. Apparently, he loved it so much he bought out like 800 tickets for a showing on opening night.
Stephen King bought 800 tickets. That's quite an endorsement.
Isn't it? And critics really praised that raw DV look for how effective it was at creating that sense of dread and realism. It proved you didn't need slick production values to make a powerful, influential horror film. Sometimes the grit is the point.
And that's our sprint through 28 Days Later. If you enjoyed the post-apocalyptic jog, follow roll credits and share it with a fellow horror fan. We'll be back soon with more behind-the-scenes stories and fun facts. Until then, mind the rage and keep the camera rolling. And here's something to chew on. Consider how the film's low-budget guerrilla filmmaking style, born of necessity, ultimately created a more visceral and impactful horror experience than many big-budget blockbusters. What does this suggest about the true ingredients of fear and innovation in storytelling?